Hi, I'm Michael Dressler, and we're here tonight to talk about unlocking the secrets of autism. I'm here with my co-hosts, Amy Dressler, Karen Raposa, and Russ Raposa. We all have experience with autism because we have autistic children, and we trying to explain about our journey. The journey is not easy. It's one without a roadmap. It's a difficult one, and we have about 15 to 20 years of experience on this journey that we'd like to share with you. Karen?
So I guess I'd like to just start, and we've probably talked about this before, but telling you a little bit about early on what it was like. Mm-hmm. And I remember vividly talking to the pediatrician and saying, he's not pointing at things. He's not looking at me when I say his name, but if I say cookie, he looks at me. And what I know about autism today, and of course our son Tommy's 19, that should have been such a huge red flag. But at the time, 19 years ago, 18 years ago, there was still not a lot of conversation about autism. And the only thing I knew about autism back then was the movie Rain Man. I don't remember how I made the connection that that story was about autism. They must have talked about it in the movie, but that's the only thing I knew. And my son wasn't acting that way. He wasn't very high functioning, but there were a lot of things that he should have been doing, I knew, that he wasn't doing.
How old was he at that point?
So I had an idea at about age 1.5, which is, we know early, still the average age of diagnosis is still about 5 or 6 years old. But I just had a sense early. I was the oldest of 5 kids, and he was my 3rd child. So it was kind of early for me to suspect, but we were right. He was diagnosed at just a little over age 2.
You know, I have to say something to that about Tommy. Prior to his, diagnosis, I can remember working. I'm in law enforcement, and I was working with my partner one day, and he said, this is even before I knew anything about autism or autistic. I can remember him saying, yeah, my son is autistic. And I only worked with him maybe one other time before that. And I said, oh, wow, that's great. I thought autistic, like artistic. He could draw. He was very artistic. And I could see he looked at me like, okay. So I was like, all right, maybe he's just being a little different. So I'm like, okay, that's all right. It was maybe 6 months to a year later, I believe, where we were at Children's Hospital in Boston, and we got the news that Tommy had autism, and autism, and I was like, oh my God! I mean, it was the worst news any parent could ever get, hear, and then it brought me back to the time to my partner. And when he was telling me that, I was like, oh my God, I got to talk to him. I got to, next time I see him, I got to tell him. So I did see him, maybe it was 6 months later or so. And I said, hey, remember that time where you said your son was autistic? And I said, oh, wow, that's great. He was, oh, Russ, I already know. I said, no, you really don't. Because my son, Tommy, was just diagnosed with autism. And I get it, and I'm sorry. And he says, no, Russ, I get it. And we kind of both chuckled about it. Yeah. Like we didn't really know. So that was my first, thing with autism. I had no idea what it was. So that's my story on that.
Well, my 3rd child also was developing very normally and meeting all the milestones, and he had some language and walked early and would point at things and say, what's this? What's that? What's that? Fish, I'd say. And he'd say fish. And I remember comparing him to my oldest son, who had a very long speech delay. And I took him to the doctor at 2, my oldest son, and they said, oh, he's not talking. That's not normal. You need to go to early intervention. So I took him to early intervention. But fast forward, he was fine and entered kindergarten at the normal age. So when Brent came along and met all the milestones, I remember thinking at the same age, oh, what a relief. I'm not going to have to go to early intervention, every morning, or have therapists in the house, blah, blah, blah. And sort of a weird joke, because he ended up having autism, and he he got a little bit sick, just kind of a cold, and ran a fever. And Michael said, I haven't really heard Brent say anything in a couple of weeks, but at the time I had 3 kids under 6, so I thought, well, I didn't really notice that. It seemed like everybody was making noise. So we take him to the doctor. They suggested a neurologist. We had him tested for Fragile X and kind of went through all the blood work and seizure checks. And they said, I think it's autism. And I thought, well, you must be out of your mind. It's not autism. He's fine. He was talking and walking and doing everything. You don't just all of a sudden slam up against a wall and say you have autism. That's not how things work. And, you know, we had someone come out and sit for a few hours that was a professional and diagnose him, and he said, yeah, he has ASD, which autism spectrum disorder. He had PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which I feel like might be code for what you say to a parent so that they don't collapse and that they think, oh, well, that's not autism, so we'll deal with it. So, yeah, it is quite uncharted territory.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Karen, tell us a little bit about what you do and explain to the public with slides.
Sure. So part of my journey that was totally unexpected, as well as Tommy's diagnosis was totally unexpected. I realized very early on, I'm a dental hygienist, and so early on I realized people in my field don't know anything about autism. I didn't. I graduated from a dental hygiene program, learned nothing about this condition, and it's so important, not just in dentistry, but in medicine. When our kids go to have dental work or medical work, we expect these medical and dental professionals to know how to help our kids, or at least how to examine them. And it was a huge slap in the face for me very early on when my boss, the dentist that I worked for, basically told me that if my son needed anything other than to have his teeth cleaned, that he wasn't going to be able to provide care because he hadn't learned what to do in school. So I started my journey in educating dental professionals, and I've actually co-edited a textbook that's used in dental hygiene programs to teach dental professionals how to help people when they come in for dental care, and I also speak all over the US and Canada on this topic. So I'll share some of the slides, just a few, that teach a little bit what I teach to dental professionals about this particular condition of autism. And so the CDC has a very specific definition of autism, and the way they describe and define it is that it's a group of developmental disabilities, and they know it's caused by unusual brain development, but they don't have a lot more information yet. They believe that there are some environmental factors, maybe some genetic factors. They know, and what's most prevalent in individuals with autism is their challenges socially and with communication. So those are the 2 big pieces that people with autism struggle the most, is in those 2 categories. But the CDC also talks about the way that these individuals pay attention. And we know with our kids, sometimes it seems like they're not paying attention to us when we're talking, yet moments later we realize they've heard everything that we've said. So while they may appear like they're not paying attention to us, they're really listening and understanding in ways that we did not think that they may be. They don't learn, our kids don't learn like typical kids learn. They need different styles of teaching. They need to be each individually understood how they'll learn best. So a good example is Tommy learns best when he's moving around, and so where he goes to school, they're actually teaching him while he's walking in the hallways, and so that's part of this definition, is that these individuals learn differently than typical kids.
They absolutely do.
And they react differently to sensations. I'm sure you've had the same experiences as us. A loud noise could completely end whatever's happening at that moment. Bright lights. I can't even imagine right now my son sitting in this studio because these individuals react differently to sensations, and all of those sensations that come in at us every day, we can filter them, and people with autism have trouble with that. So the CDC talks about this. They talk about the fact that it will last throughout a person's lifetime. Even if you hear a parent say, oh, my child's no longer on the spectrum, it means that that child has learned how to behave
and
the way we all
Mm-hmm.
expect them to, the way we've taught them to. So that's one definition that may help clear up a little bit about what we mean by autism. Healing Arts has another definition that they talk about it as a developmental delay. These individuals sometimes, not always, may have speech difficulties. I like to talk about the Big Bang Theory. Sheldon, that character on the Big Bang Theory, is a great example of someone who is very high functioning. So you may think he doesn't have speech difficulties, but if you watch the show, you know that he does struggle with sarcasm.
Yeah.
And that's part of our language. He doesn't really know when someone's being sarcastic or not.
They
So
can't tell
very
that.
literal.
even people on the spectrum who are very high functioning
Right.
struggle sometimes with speech, lack of eye contact, as we said earlier. Seems like they're not paying attention, but they're listening and
Yeah.
hearing and
Listen to everything.
understanding.
Yeah.
Many of these individuals prefer to be alone, and that's part of that whole social piece. Very difficult for a person with autism to understand what's going on in a social environment, those cues that we all understand. If you look at someone's face and they look upset or they look angry or scared, our kids have trouble reading that in a face. And a lot of times that's why they don't look at us, because there's these facial expressions going on and they don't really understand what they mean. So it can be difficult. And the most challenging piece in that this definition talks about is that many people with autism don't know when they're in a dangerous situation.
Right.
And so we know, as raising our kids, we cannot take our eyes off of them, and that is 24/7. We've showed you where our son's bedroom is so that he has to walk through our bedroom at night, because otherwise
So
we
you know.
wouldn't sleep.
Right.
We're afraid he'll get up in the middle of the night and walk out the door and not think anything of it, because they don't really understand
gotta be
when
one step
they're in
ahead
a
of them.
dangerous
But
situation. And so there, this does that same organization talks about autism as a complex brain disorder, and we talked about it's hard for these individuals to communicate and develop social relationships. And both of our families, we know the extreme behavioral challenges that some of these individuals are working through, and we've talked, sometimes and often about how it seems like when puberty hits for these kids,
Major problem.
there are these behavioral things, and so maybe there are some families listening to this who are at that stage of, what do I do when my kid starts, with self-injurious things or lashing out at other people when they never used to do that? And we've lived that journey. We've had those experiences that maybe we can.
We've been attacked numerous times around puberty.
Yeah, and
And
you
it's
can
a
imagine,
different
we have a son who's about 6 or 7 years older who it's great to have his insight, and I know you do as well, that you get those insights to what was it like, and you were able to talk to somebody about what you were feeling as you were going through puberty. And our son Tommy doesn't have anybody to talk to. I'll never forget our son RJ saying at one point, Mom, I remember I'd go to sleep at night, and I'd wake up the next morning and I felt like I was walking on stilts because my legs had literally grown that much overnight. And I think, wow, Tommy maybe wakes up some mornings and feels that too, and can't share it. He's scared maybe about what's going on. Why am I feeling this way? So.
And the other thing is that, just the brothers and sisters, how autism affects the family.
Right.
And the major issues that
Definitely
it
a ripple
causes.
effect.
Brothers and sisters feel that they're left out, or then we don't give them the same attention.
Or they feel embarrassed. Or
And we've had experiences where our kids have said stuff to us like, oh my gosh, you just spent 5 minutes listening to me. That felt really good, And they remind you that you're not giving them as much attention, and we're trying to do the best we can.
Yeah.
I think that's a big issue.
There's a lot.
It really is.
Yeah.
I know there was something that we did is one day of the week we had that just solely for RJ at the time.
We'd make special times for the other kids because you just, but it wasn't easy.
No.
No,
Still
it's
is not
It's
easy.
a great idea. It's
Yeah.
a great suggestion. If I could go back and
And-
tell
and
myself
everything.
something, I would say carve out like a day for one, a day for the other. Not always practical when you have 3 little ones.
That's
It doesn't
right.
always work out that
Exactly.
way.
That's right.
And also,
but
when Brent was in the hospital, we tried to see him every night.
right, and that's
And
taxing because you're
it's
leaving your
taxing.
family
That's
every
it,
night to go
right,
visit.
every night.
I mean, they
And-
understand, but you're still gone.
And we
So-
both had those experiences with our kids
Yep,
in the
every day
hospital
we'd be
for
there.
weeks or months at
Right.
a time because
all you
they're
can-
struggling and you're struggling as
Right.
a family trying to get
And
through.
you know, you can only say if that were you, we'd do the same thing if it were you.
Yes, yes.
But that's not
Absolutely.
Yes.
too much salve on the wound. But that's all
Yeah.
you can really say is you do the best you can.
That's exactly
Absolutely.
right.
Right.
I just found this information on this next slide pretty fascinating. I'm sure you do the same. I try to read everything I can that's written by someone who has autism because the misconception is that all people who have autism can't communicate. Well, they may communicate just differently,
Yeah.
and in some cases they may not be able to speak a word, but they can
Right.
actually write or type
Yes.
what's going on. And so this was actually written by a person with autism who can't speak, but they were asked to use the word autism and for each letter in the word autism to tell people what is important to them that other people know about people with autism. And so I found it fascinating. The first thing this person wrote is autism is something that I have. It is not who I am.
Right.
And I think often about the word, and in medicine and in dentistry, it is actually considered dehumanizing to call someone by their condition. So
Right.
if a dentist or a doctor were to call a patient autistic, they would actually be reprimanded and be, made to feel, they'd be reminded that that's not something. Now, as
Right.
families, if we're comfortable using that language, that's
Right.
fine. But this person, I thought, really wanted us to know that, we always say Tommy has autism because he is not autistic. He is a person
Right.
who happens to have autism.
Right.
And I found it fascinating that this person
I just learned that from
actually
you. That's very good.
wanted us to know that. That was the first thing.
Right.
And then I think, that they talk about, this person's talking about how they're unable to tell us how they feel. And I can't imagine what life would be like. I mean,
So true.
if you stop for a moment, we've done this as parents, and think if from this moment on you could never ever tell someone how you felt ever again.
Right.
I mean, think about a situation that you've been in and you wanted to tell somebody how you felt. You saw something that bothered you and you didn't tell them.
Right.
And then over time, it starts eating at you.
Right.
And
Right.
eventually you may scream about that or because you have words. But imagine if you don't have words.
Very frustrating.
How do you express that? And so when we think about how our kids behave sometimes,
Right.
lashing out or self-injurious, a lot of that I wonder is, gee, they're feeling something
Frustrated.
that
Yeah,
they
there's something
can't
there.
express, and they're trying to tell us
Right.
in the only way that they can. So a lot of times those behaviors are their only form of communication
Right.
for us. And so this person asks us to tell them exactly what we mean. And we talked about this earlier. Like if you said to someone with autism, if it was pouring rain and you said, it's raining cats and dogs out there, they might think that literally cats and dogs are
Dogs are
falling
raining.
out of the
Yeah.
sky. And so that's important to this person, that we be careful about how we talk
we
about
say.
things. And this is a tough one for us, especially as parents, because this person says, I want friends. I just don't know how. And that's one of the things that we, as parents, pray for our kids to have
Yeah.
good friends, we just want our kids to have friends. And we know our kids have shown that they're friends in some situations, which has been really nice for us as parents. But a lot of times for these kids, the list of friends are therapists or teachers or,
Family.
Yeah.
Family.
Yeah.
family
members.
and not friends to the definition that our other kids might have friends. And then here, this person reminds us again, we talked about this earlier, that their senses are so easily overloaded that all this stuff coming in through their eyes and their nose and their ears is just, it's hard for them to filter that stuff out. Hard to get through a day trying to deal with that.
Right.
And then the meltdowns, which is the last letter this person talks about. And they're explaining how their meltdowns are hard for everyone around them, but especially for them themselves. And I found the best description of a meltdown I read about 4 or 5 months ago, because it's not the bratty kid climbing over the chairs in the waiting room or the one who's crying because they can't get what they want. This description of a meltdown, the definition was described comparing it to a seizure, in the sense that if you do an EEG on somebody who's having a meltdown, you're not going to see a change in brain waves.
No.
But a seizure comes out of nowhere very often. There's no way to predict it, and that's what happens when our kids have a meltdown. We don't even know it's coming. When someone's having a seizure, there's nothing you can do to get it to stop. It just has to carry itself out.
Right. That's what
Same
we
thing with a
find.
meltdown.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do to get it to stop. It's just going to go its course. And then when someone's actually having a true seizure, the only thing you can do for them while it's happening is try to keep them safe.
Right.
True.
It's the same thing with a meltdown, when our kids are having a meltdown.
Recently, Brent, the way Brent's meltdowns are, what he does is it's almost like a crescendo. It's almost like I can picture it, or I can compare it to losing your temper. So he gets into a situation where something bothers him. It could be a hot van, or it could be he's uncomfortable. And he starts biting his hand or his arm, and then he builds up this crescendo, and he's sweating. He's absolutely, it's a major, like losing your temper, and then afterwards, he's fine. He can walk around,
like
and
the Tommy
he's
same
absolutely, never happened before, except he sweated, he's hot, and he's...
We had a theory about that,
Yeah.
because there was a
the
research study
fever.
done looking at kids with autism in a hot tub,
Yeah.
that we wondered, because Tommy does the same thing, we wondered if he's wanting to build his body temperature up and getting
Really?
himself into this frenzy, because after that happens, he
He's
feels
fine.
better.
Absolutely,
And so
like
they
losing
did
your
this
temper.
research study
Yeah.
looking at kids. It was like a routine that they added the hot tub scenario
Interesting.
to their regular day, and they watched and tracked how often meltdowns were happening, and they actually came down, the number of meltdowns.
Really?
Because I can remember once Brent had a fever, and he was more verbal when he had a fever
Yes.
than ever. And we would say,
Yes.
what is
Every-
going
just
That's
on?
about
what
every
actually
time.
sparked the interest in
Right.
doing that research
Almost
We used to
study.
say,
every
well, when he
time
gets a
he'd have
fever
a
next time,
fever.
we're going to talk to him
And
about
he
it.
starts talking.
Honestly,
Yes. We
And the
used-
other thing that's interesting about a person, a child that's nonverbal, Brent is 17, and teachers in school will go to a meeting and they'll say, Brent talks in school. And I'm saying, he doesn't talk at home, he doesn't,
Very little.
Except for
He'll talk
food.
what he wants
Yeah,
to talk
but
about.
with a teacher sometimes he'll say certain things
Right.
and he will not say
interact.
anything for us.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
the
Which is
demands
really
are different
amazing.
at school
Right.
than at home.
Right,
The
exactly.
demands are
True.
different.
But that's the thing about every child's different, and his needs, his and her needs are all different. And
And as you
Absolutely.
said, it's
That's
a
a-
journey. There's
it's a
not just
journey.
one thing to do, one way to do things. And we've all had the same experience, that when we get the diagnosis, you're basically told, oh, make sure they get some ABA, here's how many hours they should
Right.
get, but the rest of it, good luck, because there's no cure. There's just
a
no
life
cookie cutter
sentence.
way of doing things to help your kid.
I think that they were dealt a bad hand. They were shortchanged.
Yeah, and we're not given any guidance as parents. This slide, the same person actually was asked to use the word life, and again, just tell us about them. And I think it's important for us to kind of see that they talk about love me and help me understand your world. They feel like they're not part of the world that we know, that we're always wanting them to behave or do things a certain way, so they feel like they're not part of the same world. They feel like they want us to know that they have different abilities, to focus on the things that they are able to do and not the things, they don't disability, I like the word diffability, different abilities.
I like
that.
We all have different abilities.
Right.
None of us
Exactly.
can do the
Different.
same things.
Yep,
And so
absolutely.
this person asked us to focus on the things that they can do and not the things that they can't do. And I think we do a lot of that with our kids. We really do hone in on what they're able to do and explore my world.
That's
This
awesome.
person's asking, and I'll make you smile. The little things that they're able to do, we know, bring so much
boy.
joy to our lives.
So we really appreciate you watching, and we're going to have, I thank you all for coming and being co-hosts with us, and we hope to have many more shows. We'd like to hear from our target audience, and we have 13 topics that we've come up with. We'd like to have the Seekonk Police come in and talk about police and autism. We want to talk about legal, medical, all different things on transitioning to adulthood, and we need your help as far as how you feel about the show and what you'd like to see. So with that, we'll say goodbye.